Mary Christian, written by Merlin Sentel, narrated by Gretchen Harris. First, I stole their hot cocoa. Little heathens. They must have drunk nearly 2 gallons of that chocolate poison. And it was not just the children, no. The adults contributed and encouraged it all the more. My elder brother, Benny, had a mug in his hand since the moment he greeted me at his doorstep. I hate to say it, I really do. But I wish it was alcohol in his mug during these dark days. No, I do not wish him back to his addiction. His sobriety is the only thing I respect about the man. But the point is, it's a cosmic issue, a divine one, something bigger than me, my family, and even this pagan country. And it needed to end. If there was a thing I could do to save my family from themselves, by golly, I was going to do it. They may hate me for a while, most of them already did, but hate would not stop me from doing what's right. Oh, you better believe I took the marshmallows too. And it was easy. Yes, it was easy, because I knew I was doing the Lord's will. But what made it even easier was that all of these fools were so caught up in their ignorant laughter, games, and hot cocoa that they never even noticed me sneaking into the kitchen and emptying the remaining 4 boxes of hot cocoa mix. How they drank these steaming chunks of mud was beyond me. I've never been a fan of chocolate. Not to mention, there was a fire roaring in the living room and the heat turned up to 72 degrees. I could quite literally feel the sweat seeping down my sides, but I had to keep on my sweater. It was where I hid the devil's devices in transport. I didn't need to act casual or get out in a hurry. My family didn't bother with me. Though they never addressed it, they knew how I felt about these things. They must have deep down. I think they feared bringing it up because it would reveal the flaws in their own thinking, or maybe they were just too drunk on their merrymaking to notice. Either way, no one suspected dear Aunt Lindsey of anything. I sauntered across the room, my left hand pressed against my plain white sweater. The packets of hot cocoa mix and marshmallows were tucked in securely, but this was precautionary. It's not a long journey from the kitchen, through the living room and into the foyer, but I felt as if I caught a slow-motion glimpse of my family during this short walk. It was as if time was crawling. I saw my brothers, Benny, Kurt, and Wesley, all in their 50s, all overweight and all laughing. They wore ridiculous Christmas sweaters, which were not Christmas-like at all, if you ask me, or God. Gingerbread men eating each other. Snowmen smoking cigars. Bruce Willis dressed up like Santa, which is an anagram for Satan, by the way. How exactly are these sweaters celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ? I also saw my 5 nephews and 6 nieces on the floor shouting at each other like madmen over an elf-themed board game. Half-drunk mugs surround them. 2 look like they've spilled already on the carpet. If it were my house, I would have banned hot cocoa drinking just for that. But Benny, he's always been the careless type. Let's laugh and drink like there are no consequences. Ho, ho, ho. My mother, Judy, has always called me careful and him careless. I saw her rocking beside the fire, 86 years old, and she too, with a mug of hot cocoa. She always preferred her sons to me, though I was the one who actually took care of her. How I maintained the faith after being raised by her is astounding. Time crawled on their laughs, their sips of brown muck, their merrymaking of everything but the true meaning of Christmas. They called themselves Christians. I don't think so. Where's the evidence? Their warm bellies full of hot cocoa eclipsed the coldness of their hearts. That's all I know. But not for much longer. I slipped into my boots and wrapped my coat around me. I slipped out the side door, leaving the noise behind, and stepped into the quiet winter. I trudged through a foot of snow toward my car. The wind smacked my face. The cold attacked me. Bits of ice climbed into my boots, biting at my ankles and wetting my socks. But I kept on. Down the driveway, onto the street, 5 cars down, and I finally made it. I shoved the hot cocoa mixes and marshmallows into the deep of my trunk. I slammed it shut, but knew this was one of many trips to be made tonight. I marched back toward the house while the scheme began to take shape in my mind. I would grab the cakes, the pies, and the candy next. I'd rip out the Wi-Fi router and modem and shove them in my trunk. No more Christmas movies, no more sweets, no more games, no more of any of this commercialized, consumeristic nonsense. I may sound like the Grinch or Ebenezer Scrooge, but this is not about jealousy or fear. This is about doing what's right. I may not be able to steal the Christmas tree or every hollow decoration, but anything and everything I could remove and shove in this trunk I was going to take. Maybe, just maybe, when all that's left is the nativity scene, a few Advent devotionals, and their cold hearts, they will think about the true meaning of Christmas. Shriek! That was the sound of my boot slipping on the ice. I hadn't even made it to the driveway yet. In the middle of my rant, in the middle of the evening, playing in my mind's eye like a movie, I flew backward onto the glossy gray road sprinkled with snow, and with a good hard whack, everything went black. My mind woke up with my eyes still closed, but I could hear the crackling of a fire, coals spitting and popping. I hoped to God they had put the fire guard up, or else the whole house might go up in flames. Maybe they had it up earlier. I couldn't remember. My eyes began to flutter open, and all I could think about was how inconvenient this incident was for my scheme. How ironic. How ridiculous. This will be how I spend the next 12 days with my faithless family, sitting by the fire recuperating, watching them perform their Christmas traditions beside my senile mother. Of course, the one person in this house who wants to do the right thing has the wrong thing happen to them. God gets the gears turning, and the devil's got to throw a wrench in it. When my vision cleared, I noticed they had put the guard over the fire, but it looked different. It wasn't Benny's rusty old metal guard, which had always been too small for his fireplace. He must have purchased a new one. This one was Christmas-themed, with a Santa figure and a pine tree formed in the mesh. What a waste of money, and very irrelevant for the rest of the year. Irrelevant for the entire year, actually. I began to turn my face, now feeling a throbbing pain on the back of my head, followed by a sting from my hip and shoulder. But the pain all slipped away for a moment as I realized how very quiet it was in the house, and that it wasn't just the fire guard that was different. Everything was different. The tree, the decorations, the room. This was not Benny's house at all. I heard some clangs and bangs in the other room, followed by some whistling. I hate whistling. Benny whistles all the time. I sat there for a moment, still gathering my senses, but also starting to panic, when a man came around the corner of what I supposed was a hallway. He saw me and looked startled too, though I'm sure I was more startled than him, since I knew not where I was, nor why I was there, nor what I was there for. "Oh," is all he managed to say. He had a tray with 2 mugs on it. I opened my mouth before I knew what to say myself. What do you say in a moment like this? Well, whatever the case, what slipped out was, "What on God's green earth am I doing here? If you intend to cause me harm, I promise you I will not go down easily. I am a feisty woman and God is on my side." "I believe you, miss. I understand if you're shaken up. Sorry about that." He stepped further into the room, setting the tray down on a side table and taking a seat. I wanted him to just spit it out. Why was I here? What did he want with me? So I told him. "Explain yourself, sir," I shouted. Sorry. I saw you slip and fall outside in the cold. I didn't know where to take you or who to call. I thought of calling the police, but not everyone has good insurance. I didn't want to cause you more trouble." I saw a window half blocked by his Christmas tree. I thought I could see Benny's house across the street. I caught a partial view of a giant inflatable Santa and elf. It had to be his house. A wave of relief rushed over my body. As the panic washed away, the pain of my fall came back upon me. I had this desire to get up and sprint out of this man's house and back to Benny's. But I didn't. I don't really know why. It might have been something about his face. His big nose, sunken eyes, thick beard. He had these very masculine features, but also this gentle, soft way of looking at you. It reminded me of my father. He was probably near the age my father was when he passed. In any case, I waited past that first moment of rushing out the door, and so he began to speak to me again. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I let out a grunt. It was a much less masculine sound than I'd like to have made, but I think he got the message. It said, I'm not great, but fine, I guess, considering. A grunt can say a lot in a little. I made you some warm, hot cocoa, he said, lifting a mug off the tray. I hate hot cocoa. Oh, well, I made some tea as well. He set down the mug and picked up the other. He offered it to me, and I accepted. I did like tea. Hot cocoa for me, he said. I plopped an ice cube in them, so it should be good for drinking. I took a sip of the tea. It was not very good, too bitter and with an awful aftertaste. But I kept sipping it. I wanted to run away, but I also didn't. Something about the peace and quiet kept me sitting. Even if I was in a stranger's room with strange tea, it was a nice exchange for my family and their heathen chaos. I wondered if he was a Christian man, and if so, what kind of Christian. I saw a nativity scene on a shelf across the room, not that that's saying much. If you're feeling all right to head home, please don't mind me, he said. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You can also sit here a while and drink your tea. I boinked my head last year, and it's no joke. Hope I don't have a concussion, I said. I hope not, too. I'm Chris, by the way. Lindsey, I replied. You a Christian man, Chris? I blurted out. He smiled, and I realized it wasn't the nose, sunken eyes, or beard. It was his smile. It was just like Dad's. I don't even know how to describe it, but they had the same smile. I am a Christian. Around this time of year, I like to say, I'm Chris, the Christian. Merry Christmas. You actually say that to people? I asked, trying not to reveal how oddly comfortable I felt around him just because he reminded me of my father. I do, he replied, laughing to himself. Some jokes are just for yourself, I drank more of my tea. I was getting used to the bitterness, the aftertaste. Oh, I'll be right back. Chris popped up, left the room, and returned within 30 seconds. He brought with him an ice pack. Figured you'd need this. I put it against the back of my head. It was very cold, but helped with the pain. My head and hand felt out of place, touching the cold, while the rest of my body was warmed by the fire and tea. We were sitting in silence for a minute, which I did not mind. But then Chris started whistling, so I spoke, hoping he'd stop. Nobody cares about the true meaning of Christmas anymore, I said. You don't think so? He asked. No. All anyone cares about is building snowmen, Santa Claus, sex, etc. All good things, but no, not the true meaning of Christmas. Not even close. Well, I might disagree with you there, Lindsey. Sometimes the things are closer to the thing than you think. What does that mean? It's all nonsense if you ask me. Chris smiled at me. It was a gentle smile like the one my father gave me when I told him I didn't want to marry the man I'd been dating for 6 years. Like the smile he gave me in the hospital room as I cried my eyes out saying goodbye. It was a smile that was somehow careless and also caring. Can you touch my tree from where you're sitting? Asked Chris. I looked over at his overstuffed Christmas tree, plump and green, dressed with lights of all colors, trimmed with tinsel and garland and completely drowned in an assortment of ugly homemade ornaments. By the smell of it, it was very real. What? I asked in response. Can you reach it? I suppose. Reach out and touch it, will you? I was honestly very confused by this. Why was he asking me to touch his tree? I wanted to shout out, no, I will not touch your tree. Touch your own tree. What is wrong with you? But he just stared at me with this kind and casual glare like what he was asking wasn't completely absurd at all. Unless you're allergic, are you? To pine, that is? No, I'm not, but my voice fell away. Go on and touch it then. He would not let up, this man. I was beginning to get uncomfortable, but I wasn't sure what else to say or do. So yes, I set down my tea and I reached out and touched it. What happened next could only be described as a whirlwind. It was like every light on that tree spun around me in flashes of lightning. Blue, green, yellow, purple, red. It was a tornado of color. The branches wrapped around me like a blanket of bark being sewn around every inch of my body. It didn't quite scratch or cut, but there was a roughness and dampness about it. I was somehow wet and warm. I began to feel the pine needles erecting from my head, my hands, my legs, like each hair follicle of mine had become one with the pine needles. And the scent of the tree, it was somehow surrounding me and yet coming from me. I felt as if I had become the tree, or as if the tree had become me. I do not know which, and I do not know that it matters which. My vision began to blur of green and brown as the color of the Christmas lights dimmed and everything became tree. I opened my eyes, or the tree opened its eyes, again I'm not sure which, and I saw leaves and branches being drawn away like stage curtains being opened for a show. But what I was shown was a hilltop. A tree stood tall and strong at the center. The bark of the tree was almost green, and it seemed to be moving, maybe breathing. The trunk, the branches, the leaves, they reminded me of every tree I'd ever seen, yet somehow it also wasn't quite like any tree I'd ever seen. There were these red, low-hanging fruit. They looked like berries, but were big, the size of apples. On the ground, I saw one fruit lying still, 2 distinct bites taken from it. Under the skin of the berry was an ink-like liquid. It was whispering to me. I wanted to draw closer to it, but then I saw something slithering in the branches. It cocked its head toward me. In an instant, I saw the snake and knew exactly where I was. But suddenly, tree branches swallowed me up and took me away. When they pulled away again, I was very small. I was looking up at a mighty forest, though I do not know if it was the forest that was truly mighty, or if it only seemed mighty to me because I was tiny. A strong wind came over me. It was so strong I thought that I might blow away, but I did not. On the contrary, it was actually everything else besides me that began to fly away. Dirt, leaves, branches, trees, minutes, moments, years. This wind was transforming the forest at a rapid speed. I watched old trees become limp, dry, and fall. I watched young trees sprout and rise. At some point, though I'm not sure when, I realized that I too was a small tree. I began to rise. I rose tall, then taller, and even taller still. Eventually, I rose high to the treetops of which I was a tree-topping. At this time, however long I was truly there, I do not know, but it only felt like a few moments to me. I heard an echoing thwack, thwack, thwack. This is when I fell. It was a slow fall, and my branches wrapped around me as if covering my eyes to protect me. When my eyes opened again, I was looking at a man. He was fashioning a piece of wood. I think it had been part of this tree. I felt it somehow. He was working gently with the piece, diligent and careful. I couldn't see his face at first, but then he turned toward me to pluck up a chisel. When I saw his face, I just knew it was him. I knew it was Jesus. This warmth came over me like my insides were being hugged. Unbidden, water began to fill my eyes and run down my face, though it wasn't really water. It was sticky, like sap. It was sticking to my cheek, sliding down slowly. Then the branches covered me again, clouding my vision and then pulling away once more. This time I knew immediately where I was and what was happening. To my left, he was hanging on a tree. I was beside him. The whirlwind carried me to more moments after this. They were smaller moments and much quicker. I can only remember a handful. I saw trees being planted, watered, and chopped down. I saw wood made into tables, buildings, and tools. I saw pine trees standing amid the harshest of winters. I do not know when or how, but eventually I found myself back in Chris's living room, touching his Christmas tree, fondling it. I was sitting there like nothing had happened, like I'd imagined it all. "What do you think of the tree?" asked Chris. "What do I stammered, almost afraid bark or sap would spit out of my mouth if I kept talking. "What do you think of it?" Beginning to feel very human again, I took a long look at this strange man and the strange tea he had given me. "Did you drug me? What did you put in this?" I shouted. "I did not drug you, Lindsey. You simply touched the tree. That is why I've asked you what you thought of it." "I do not believe you." Tears were beginning to form in my eyes. I was all of a sudden feeling very afraid and befuddled in my own skin. Maybe I have a concussion, or else I'm losing my mind. I don't know. "Lindsey, I think you're just all right. This is why I asked you to touch the tree. I wanted to show you what I thought of it. Did you see?" "I do not understand." "You do not understand what was shown to you, or you do not understand why it was shown?" I tried to answer, but I couldn't even understand what he was saying. My mind was overtaken by this heaviness in my heart. Anxiety was pushing me down. Fear was holding me there. "Sometimes the truth comes heavy-handed, but when the hand softens its grip, the truth remains. We can take a moment to let things settle." Almost immediately, when the words were still in his mouth, still leaping from his tongue, I stood up. Without another thought, I bolted across the room. I turned toward the hallway, which I guessed led to the front door. I was right. Charging toward it, I saw my coat hung on a large collection of candy canes, a coat hanger made out of them, another cheap, empty decoration. I grabbed my coat, and my hand grazed the candy cane as I took it when another whirlwind took me away. Red and white beams spun around me this time. Peppermint filled my nostrils. I could hear faint "bah, bah" sounds swelling in my ears. The red began to dissolve into shadows, giving the white texture and form. At first, I thought I was flying through clouds, but then I felt them against my skin. I realized it was wool. Squeezing out of the wool, I found myself in a pasture on a starry night. I looked out and saw a young boy herding sheep. He had a shepherd's staff, looking very much like a brown wooden candy cane. It took everything in me not to give in to the scene, to not study the boy, the sheep. I felt as if I were in a dream where my awareness had left me, where I was caught up in a story not my own. But deep inside myself, I knew where this was going. I knew where I was and why I was there. I knew it was not real, so I pulled my hand away from the candy cane coat hanger. I was back. Some way, somehow, I had let go. I turned around to see Chris standing at the end of the hallway, sipping his hot cocoa, simply watching me with that same careless, caring look. "What is wrong with this place?" I said, almost shouting. "I like to think things here are very right, actually." I put on my coat. "I would like to leave," I said. "You can leave. I know you have things to get to, as do I. I just want you to know, I think you're right, Lindsey. The true meaning of Christmas is often overlooked. But if you look under the many things you look over, you may as well find the true meaning too. It all belongs to Him. All the silly stories, all the cheap decorations. You know, I used to hate Christmas, everything about it. But when I became a God-fearing man, suddenly everything had meaning, beauty, a point. Even hot cocoa." He took a long sip of his warm drink like it was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted. "They are distractions to the truth, or attractions to the truth. We just have to show them, remind them of what all the seemingly pointless things seem to point to." "I don't think that makes any sense." "Well, think about it a little more. I'm not saying there are not some things we should take away, but there are plenty of things we should take back. Do you understand?" "Who are you? Tell me!" I actually shouted this time. "I'm Chris, the Christian. Merry Christmas, Lindsey." He smiled at me once more, the smile that reminded me so much of my father. But I turned, careful not to bump any other mystical items, and opened the door. I stepped into the cold, wintry night and shut the door behind me. An icy wind blew over me, but somehow fell not upon my skin, but underneath it. It was as if my insides were being chilled. With it came this sense of awakening, like when I came out of whatever trance I had been in after touching the tree and the candy cane. Suddenly, I wondered if there had ever been a Chris or a tree or a candy cane. Did I imagine it all? Was it all a dream? Was I actually knocked out cold on the concrete road somewhere? No, I couldn't be. I was alive. I was real. I could feel it. I was standing across the street from Benny's house, standing on his neighbor's doorstep. I was too aware, too awake for this to be untrue. But I had to be certain, so I turned and opened Chris's door back up. But to my surprise, I did not see Chris nor the inside of his house. Instead, I saw a little girl wearing a red sweater dress. She looked at me, her eyebrows furrowed. "Who are you?" she said, then shouted, "Dad, who's this lady?" I shut the door. I took 2 slow steps backward. It did not make any sense, but few things had that night. I started into the snow. They were deep steps, the ice fluff now about 1.5 feet high. I heard the door open back up behind me. "Hello?" said a man. I turned. It was not Chris, but a man about 30, standing beside his daughter. I did not recognize either of them. "Are you all right?" he asked, realizing he did not recognize me either. "I don't know," I exhaled. I marched forward, but I could hear him behind me saying, "I'll be right back." It sounded like he was putting on boots. The young man rushed up next to me. He was wearing only a thin green sweater, shivering already. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Sorry, wrong house. My brother Benny lives across the street," I said. "No worries. I'll walk you over." "No, that's fine." "Want to wish Benny a happy Christmas." Against my will, the young man scooped up my arm in his. He began walking by my side, helping me across the road. At least I did not slip this time. We made it inside, and the young man helped me out of my coat and hung it up. Benny came around the corner. "Where'd you go, Linz?" asked Benny. "Out," I said. "Tommy?" he asked, giving the young man a confused look. "Just thought I'd say hello. She got confused, knocked on my door," said the young man, apparently Tommy. "Confused?" said Benny, knowing me to be a very sane woman. Tommy shrugged as I kicked off my boots. "We're just about to start a Christmas movie. You gonna join, Linz?" Usually, I'd have just said no and left it at that. But before I knew what I was saying much more. "No, I was thinking we could read an Advent devotional or sing some carols." "That'd be nice," replied Benny. "Night's still young. We can watch a movie after." I was very surprised at his response. He looked at me and smiled. I was reminded at this moment how very similar he looked to our father. He had that same sort of careless, caring look. Like Chris. Like Dad. I didn't realize until that moment how long it had been since I really looked at him, made eye contact, and saw him up close. I suppose he is his father's son. "Okay," I said. "You in a rush?" Benny asked Tommy. "Want some hot cocoa?" Tommy thought for a moment, then shrugged and said, "Sure." I hobbled past Benny. "You'll have to get it from my trunk," I said.